Understanding how and why school finance has transformed over the years delivers a backdrop for examining the current status, particularly distribution systems, state taxation conventions, and social movements. So, let's go back in time. America's school funding approaches and the tax means to support education have evolved since the Revolutionary War due to political viewpoints, economic pressures, legislative actions, and litigation outcomes. From our country's earliest beginnings in 1607, the colonists valued education, and in 1635, the Boston Latin School at Denham, Massachusetts, became the first publicly funded secondary school in America. The Massachusetts Act of 1647 established the right of the state to require communities to create and maintain elementary schools in all towns for every child and secondary schools for youth in larger towns. The law also inaugurated the tradition that these schools should be funded through locally governed property tax, as land was considered to be a valid measure of wealth. Although our founding fathers were supportive of education, neither the education of the citizenry nor the funding of public schools were mentioned in the U.S. Constitution. The 10th Amendment in 1791 reserved the authority to the states. Thereby, education became a function of the state rather than the federal government. New York City schools were started in 1805 by the Public School Society, a Protestant evangelical group who raised money through membership dues and donated philanthropic gifts. The school day began with prayer, hymn, and biblical readings. However, the school textbooks had a strong anti-Catholic bias, and the society would not fund Catholic schools. Anti-Catholic sentiment grew across the country as many states added Blaine amendments into their state constitutions, which prohibited Catholic schools from receiving state funding. All the while, public schools were flourishing. By 1850, most states had state constitutional provisions to create free statewide public schools. Such clauses as general and uniform and thorough and efficient systems describe the state's responsibility for funding these schools. During the time, locally collected property tax was the most common method to fund schools. The first individual state income tax system was imposed by Wisconsin in 1911. Throughout the years, many states instituted individual state income tax because additional revenue was needed to fund public schools. A flat grant was the earliest method to disperse state tax to schools. Other methods, such as the most popular foundation formula with a state share subtracted from the state foundation level, and power equalization with the local tax rate multiplied by the guaranteed yield, were devised to equalize funding based on localities' capacity to pay for services. Throughout the 1930s and 40s, many states introduced state sales tax to infuse additional revenue into state coffers to finance public schools.
The National Defense Education Act was signed into law on September 2, 1958, and provided funding to United States educational institutions at all levels. It was an important math and science initiative inaugurated by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1958. and motivated to increase the technological sophistication and power of the United States. The act followed a growing national sense that U.S. scientists were falling behind scientists in the Soviet Union, and was catalyzed by the success of the Soviets launching the first ever satellite, Sputnik, the year before on October 4, 1957. U.S. citizens feared that schools in the USSR were superior to American schools, and Congress reacted by adding the act to the U.S. schools to be up to speed. The act authorized funding for 4 years and increased funding for each year. For example, funding increased on 8 program titles from $183 million in 1959 to $222 million in 1960. The NDEA was instituted primarily to stimulate the advancement of education in science, mathematics, and modern foreign languages. However, it also provided aid in other areas, including technical education, area studies, geography, English as a second language, counseling and guidance, school libraries and librarianship, and educational media centers. The act, therefore, was designed to fulfill 2 purposes. First, it was designed to provide the country with specific defense-oriented personnel. This included providing federal help to foreign language scholars, area study centers, and engineering students. Second, it provided financial assistance, primarily through the National Defense Student Loan Program, for thousands of students who would be part of the growing numbers enrolling at colleges and universities in the 1960s.
Court challenges marked the 1970s as Lemon versus Kurtzman and Aguilar versus Felton contested parochial schools from receiving state aid. The Lemon case found using public monies for teacher salaries was unconstitutional. However, the Aguilar and Felton case ultimately found that public school teachers could educate disadvantaged students in supplemental reading and mathematics instruction at religious schools during regular school hours. Litigation at the state level regarding school funding inequities during the same time frame led courts to order many states to overhaul their systems to more equally fund public schools. In DeRolf versus State of Ohio, the state Supreme Court declared that the state's education finance system was unconstitutional and ordered the state to change the foundation formula. In the Zellman-Simmons case, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled the Ohio School Voucher Program, referred to as opportunity scholarships or state-funded scholarships that pay for students to attend private schools rather than public schools, did not violate the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment to the United States Constitution.
Zellman versus Simmons-Harris from 2002. In the 1996-1997 school year, the Cleveland school system in Ohio undertook a voucher school program to help alleviate the failure of the city's educational system. Cleveland schools were among the worst in the state and could not meet any of the state's 18 requirements for acceptable educational performance. 90% of ninth graders could not pass basic proficiency tests, and the entire school district performed at levels much lower in comparison with the other school districts in Ohio. On average, 2/3 of a class dropped out, and 1/4 of the class that finished high school could not graduate. To help fix this problem, Ohio created the Pilot Project Scholarship Program to provide qualifying students with voucher tuition aid in Cleveland. 60% of students participating in the program were living at or below the poverty line. Students participating in the program could use the voucher to go to any participating school in Cleveland, whether it was public, private non-religious, or private religious. Between 1999 and 2000, 96% of students in the program were enrolled in private religious schools. A group of Ohio taxpayers saw this as a violation of the Establishment Clause, which is the part of the First Amendment that states Congress shall make no laws respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Taxpayers challenged the program on both state and federal levels. The Ohio Supreme Court rejected the federal claims, while the District Court issued a preliminary injunction in August of 1999 that made Ohio stop further implementation of the program. The case was then passed to the U.S. Court of Appeals, where they upheld the decision that the program was in violation of the Establishment Clause. However, the Supreme Court overturned the Court of Appeals in a 5-4 decision that decided that the program was not in violation of the Establishment Clause. Chief Justice Rehnquist, Justice O'Connor, Justice Scalia, Justice Kennedy, and Justice Thomas voted that the program was not in violation of the clause, while Justice Stevens, Justice Souter, Justice Ginsburg, and Justice Breyer voted that it was in violation of the Establishment Clause. Chief Justice Rehnquist delivered the majority opinion, while O'Connor and Thomas filed concurring opinions. Justices Stevens, Souter, and Breyer also filed dissenting opinions. The court's decision that the program was not in violation of the Establishment Clause, based upon the distinction between government programs that provide aid directly to religious schools and programs of true private choice, and also neutrality and principle of private choice, with emphasis of private choice by participants without government input. This case helped determine the constitutionality of voucher systems and that vouchers can be used on religious schools as well as other schools. It will affect schools across the country who use or have even thought about using the voucher system.
With the advancement of school choice programs in the 21st century that include vouchers, inter-district open enrollment, homeschooling, magnet schooling, virtual classrooms, and charter schools, the public education establishment routinely argues that these school choice programs, where the money follows the child, harm students who remain in public schools. Challenges to the state Blaine amendments that block church-supported schools from receiving public funds characterize the most recent school finance progression. 3 cases have turned back from the United States Supreme Court to their respective state courts, including Trinity Lutheran versus Comer. This case challenged church-supported schools from receiving a state grant to replace its playground surface with a safer material. Stay tuned for further developments as these cases will be determined later. To fund schools today, all 50 states permit property tax, and 41 states access individual state income tax on salary and wages to fund public schools and other responsibilities, while New Hampshire and Tennessee tax interest and dividend income only. Alaska, Florida, Nevada, South Dakota, Texas, and Washington, as well as Wyoming, do not currently levy a state income tax. On this map, look at your state's sales tax rates. Notice that 5 states, Alaska, Delaware, Montana, New Hampshire, and Oregon, do not have a general sales tax. Regarding present-day distribution systems, 37 states currently execute some derivation of the Foundation Program. 9 states, Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky, Louisiana, Montana, Maryland, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Utah presently utilize a combination or tiered method to allocate state funds. Vermont and Wisconsin employ power equalization. Hawaii exercises full state funding, and North Carolina implements a flat grant. This concludes the history of American school finance.